Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Catherine Brando and I'm joining us from California. I am one of the co-leads for this Global Week of Action for SDG 16. I'll pass it over to Tanisha to let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone. We are so excited to have you all here at the opening ceremony of the Global Week of Action. My name is Janisha Saxena, and I'm the co-lead of the GWOA team, and I'll be joining in from Al Wakra, Qatar. Oh, Catherine, I believe you're muted.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry. So I just wanted to go over the schedule really quickly of our Global Week of Action to make you aware of all the events that we have going on. So we have our first Sandbox session right after this opening ceremonies from 15 to 16 UTC, where you will all have the opportunity to discuss with your peers and create an action-based campaign specific to SDG 16. Then we have various other workshops as well. For our final session for today, we will have an open forum on human trafficking, highlighting various experts that will answer questions posed by the audience and also some pre-written questions that were put together by our team. And from there, we have many different workshops, including on the GRACE initiative by the UNODC. We have a presentation from Youthopia, the Green Hope Foundation, and The World in Us. We also have 2 student presentations, including from Alexia Nastasia talking about advocacy for girls' empowerment, and Radhima Sharma, the initiative to fight human trafficking. Finally, we'll have our dolphin pool and closing ceremony, where students will be able to present their ideas created in the Sandbox on their action campaigns to a group of panelists that have expertise within SDG 16 and will provide feedback on these solutions. After that, we will have our final social hour where everyone will be able to socialize with one another and get to know each other after these 2 weeks of workshops. Next slide, please. We wanted to present this quick video on MUN Impact. Ayuko, you can start playing.
Right now, youth from around the world are creating an innovative and self-sustaining leadership incubator.
Open and accessible to secondary and university students.
Fueling and driving change to advance sustainable development goals.
In just 2 years, MUN Impact, a global student-led nonprofit, has experienced phenomenal growth in its many programs.
From global online model UN debates,
youth-led summits and conferences,
student-created publications and podcasts,
global weeks of action,
and a host of other creative initiatives.
Students from every continent have come together to advance the SDGs
in ways that are meaningful and relevant to us.
In the process, we are learning critical 21st century skills
that will help solve our planet's most pressing problems.
These skills aren't learned in textbooks.
They are learned by doing.
And that's what we do at MUN Impact. We dream.
We create.
We network.
We build.
We are laying for the foundation for the world we want
and need.
MUN Impact has built a network, reaching youth in over 170 countries.
Many of whom have never had an opportunity
to engage and collaborate with others outside their local communities.
We have the energy,
the passion,
and the ideas to bring meaningful change to our communities.
An investment in us will yield dividends for decades to come.
The United Kingdom,
Japan,
Egypt, Argentina,
Germany,
Israel,
Bangladesh,
Czech Republic,
Kuwait,
Malaysia,
Nigeria,
New Zealand,
Singapore,
India,
Ghana,
the United States of America,
Portugal,
Pakistan. We are MUN Impact.
So that was a quick nutshell of what our organization is about. If If you're new to MUN Impact and would like to find out more, you can find more information about us atmunimpact.org. Next slide, please.
Right now, youth from around the world.
Awesome. So I now wanted to take the time to introduce Ms. Alison Boak, who will be speaking to us today about human trafficking and about SDG 16. Alison Boak is the director of the Global Center on Human Trafficking located at Montclair State University. She's a passionate leader in the global movement to end human trafficking, who for the past 25 years has worked alongside survivors of all forms of trafficking to develop innovative, survivor-driven approaches to prevent and address human trafficking across the United States, Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Asia. She has also co-founded several organizations, networks, and coalitions at the forefront of the anti-trafficking field today, including the International Organization for Adolescence, Freedom Network USA, and the National Human Trafficking and Disabilities Working Group. Thank you, Ms. Boak, for joining us in today. Before we get started with the conversation, I just wanted to give you this time to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do. Ms. Boak, I believe you're muted.
Good morning, everyone, or whatever time of day it is, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, Catherine, and to all the co-leaders for the invitation to address this very important group and this very important event today. So, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I'm so thrilled that you are looking at the issue of human trafficking. We've had an anti-trafficking law at the international level and in the United States for more than 20 years. But sadly, traffickers are continuing to operate with near impunity. Trafficking victims are on the rise, and this is all despite a substantial upsurge in awareness efforts to address the problem. So we need to really look and examine at how we're going to address this issue of human trafficking so that we can have peace, justice, and strong institutions to address human trafficking. I'm the director of the Global Center on Human Trafficking, which is a multidisciplinary center at Montclair State University. And we're working hard to really do something what we call flip the script on human trafficking. So what does that mean? That means that current efforts are not giving us the results that we want. So how do we change that conversation? How do we involve survivors in policy, research, and practice? How do we embed their lived experience and embed their views into this work? So that's really what we're focused about at the Global Center on Human Trafficking. We're flipping the script by, instead of having a bunch of people working on the issue of human trafficking and then consulting with a survivor or two, we're trying to figure out how we can support, empower, and educate survivors of human trafficking to be in on developing program research and policies from the ground up, so that we can switch the way that everything is developed from a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach where survivors are included from the very beginning. And I'm really thrilled to see so many young people care about this issue, because prevention really is key. For those people like myself who've been working on this issue for over 20 years, we don't want this to happen to anyone. We want to provide all young people around the world, no matter where they are, with the skills and the tools and the education and the know-how to protect themselves and their friends and their families from this horrific crime of human trafficking. So I'm really, really so happy to see all of you interested in this issue and up on a Saturday morning to give this issue some attention. You can check out the Global Center on Human Trafficking's website. We are going to be unveiling a very unique educational opportunity for those of you who are bound for college. We're unveiling a certificate in human trafficking at our university starting this fall, and we'll offer a whole bunch of different courses that relate to the issue of human trafficking. We also have lots of opportunities for young people to get involved. We have a volunteer program, an internship program, and we're developing projects all over the world. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to connect with you. Please keep at what you're doing. Young people are really the future for this issue. It's only with your ideas and your energy and your passion that we can make this issue go away and something of the past. So thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'm really thrilled to be here. I want to wish you all a very, very successful week. And I can't think of any more important issue, especially with what's going on in the world, for peace, justice, and strong institutions. So best of luck to all of you. Have a very successful week. And I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation. I put my email in the chat, so please do reach out and we'd love to connect with you. And please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and all the social media channels. We'd love to hear.
Thank you so much, Ms. Boak. I'm sure that our audience has a couple of questions, and so does our team as well. Would you be open to answering?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so one of my questions was, can you tell us the founding story of the International Organization for Adolescents? What inspired you to start working in the human trafficking field and become an activist?
Sure. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the U.S. Peace Corps volunteer program, but it's where people who've graduated from college in the United States are placed in other countries, and we volunteer for 2 years. So I was sent to the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and I volunteered for 2 years as an English teacher, and I taught students at the secondary school level and the university level. And when I was there, I didn't hear anything about this issue called human trafficking. I taught thousands of students over the 2 years. I stayed a third year and did a Fulbright and worked with university level people. But when I got back to the United States to go to graduate school, there was a front page article on the New York Times, and it detailed the story of this young woman who was trafficked for several years from Latvia, which is where I had been living, to Israel. And it talked about this horrific story that she had endured as a sex slave. And I read this article and I was like, wow, I can't believe that something like this happened in Latvia, where I just spent 3 years. And then like a week later, the Chicago Tribune, which is a newspaper in Illinois, had an article that said that the United States FBI had busted the largest human trafficking ring in the history of the United States. And guess where the human traffickers were from? They were from Riga, Latvia, which is the city I had been living in. So I'm a very nosy person. So I thought, what is going on? How could I spend 3 years in this country with all these young people? And I never heard of anything like human trafficking. So I actually got some funding from the UN, from UNDP, and I went over to Latvia and I organized a workshop on human trafficking. And this is before we had a UN protocol, before we had a TVPA in the United States. And at the end of the workshop, there was literally a line out the door of people that their students had disappeared. They had gone to Italy to be a model and everyone had lost track of them. Or their sister had gone to Spain to pick strawberries and had never been heard from again. And what we basically realized was that young people were literally disappearing from the Baltic states, and they were being trafficked right from under our noses. And nobody had any idea that this was happening. Because at this time, the Baltic states had just opened up. Russia had been occupying these countries, and they had just regained their independence. So all the young people were so excited to travel abroad and work abroad. So then together with some of my colleagues, I attended Columbia University's School of Public Health. So together, me and my colleagues, we said we must do something to educate these young people around the world about how traffickers are preying on them. And we started the International Organization for Adolescents, which was dedicated to empowering young people to not be involved with exploitation and human trafficking. And so that organization, which is still going today, it's been going for over 22 years, worked in 14 countries, primarily on prevention, how to prevent young people from becoming victims of human trafficking.
That sounds really awesome. And we have a question from Linus in the chat. So what keeps you going, and why do you feel, I feel like you kind of already answered this just a little bit, and why do you feel that human trafficking is something to take action upon? So maybe how you've gotten involved with these human trafficking survivors and how you've helped them.
Yes, so the way I keep going is that, whenever there's some big problem, you always feel better doing something than just standing by. And what really blows my mind is that in this 21st century, Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. The only things that make more money in the entire world are drugs and weapons, right? So this is a humongous business enterprise. And the traffickers are so savvy. This is the way they're making millions and millions of dollars. And they're constantly reinventing the way they're human trafficking. So even though there's some ways that we see that's been happening year after year after year, I'm always my mind is blown, and I'm always amazed at the new creative ways that human traffickers are trying to traffic people. So this field never gets dull, it never gets boring, and there's so much work to do. And human trafficking cuts across almost every sector. It cuts across education and health and law enforcement. So there's so many different avenues that we need to work to address human trafficking that it never, ever gets dull and boring. And what really keeps me going is all the survivors that I work with. These survivors who have literally been through torture and things that most of us cannot imagine. And they're so strong and they're so willing to educate us and help on this issue and share their stories and share their work and ideas. So working with survivors is really what keeps me motivated.
That sounds really awesome. Our next question for you is from Lisa Martin. So how have you seen human trafficking change over the years?
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for that question. Sadly, a lot of the methods that human trafficking use are the same. They've been the same for decades. And that's what really upsets me, it makes me realize that we need to think of new ways. We need to bring more innovation, because there's a statistic out there that less than 3% of traffickers are ever even investigated or punished, right? So a lot of them are doing the same old thing. We just need to give more attention, and we need to get more creative in the way that we're trying to address human trafficking. Some of the ways that I've seen it change over the years, especially with media and the growth of social media and online, everything being online, especially during COVID. So traffickers are very much alive and well in gaming chat rooms, all different kinds of chat rooms, preying on young people. And the way they're doing this is transforming as social media transforms. So we really have to keep up with technology, and we have to keep up with the different platforms, because, for example, there was a big effort in the United States to get rid of Backpage, which were these online ads where a lot of minors were being sex trafficked. And we fought against Backpage, and we had some reforms with Backpage, but then the human traffickers just moved to another outlet. So we really have to stay on top of what websites and what chat rooms and what games and things are they recruiting young people. So it requires us to be constantly changing how we work.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question, it seems to be quite a popular question. I've seen it quite a few times now. So how can we get involved as young people in these kinds of topics? I know you also mentioned that there are various ways for students to get involved through your organization. Perhaps you could share more information on that and perhaps drop a link in the chat as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the most important that a young person can do to prevent human trafficking is to get themselves educated. There's lots of free trainings out there, and to learn about the issue and then help spread the word in your schools, because it's very, very difficult to get into the schools to really talk about this issue, because it intersects with a lot of issues that schools kind of are afraid to talk about, like drugs and sex and forced labor. So I think the more young people themselves know about this issue and can be aware of it and share it with their circles of friends and in their schools and in their communities and in their like different sports groups and things they do, that is the most important thing. Prevention is by far, in education, the most important thing that we need to do. So there's lots of different organizations that offer internships and offer the opportunity to learn more about human trafficking. And I don't know if there will be any follow-up, because I could put together a list for you, Catherine, that we can maybe share with participants, so they can go on and learn different ways that they can get involved in the issue.
Yes, that's definitely something we could do. I'll contact you more.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I'd be happy to put some of that together.
Yes, awesome. And our next question has to do with the recent situation in Ukraine. So how is the crisis in Ukraine feeding into current trafficking rings? What can we do to raise awareness?
Well, thank you so much for that question, because that question just gave me goosebumps. I know all of us in the human trafficking field are just scrambling to figure out how we can make a difference and how we can prevent the flow of millions of people coming over these borders. So whenever there is a humanitarian crisis, whenever people are moving, there's always people at risk of human trafficking. And the situation with Ukraine is even more egregious because we have lots of women and children, which we know are one of the most vulnerable groups for human trafficking, even when there's not such a big crisis as what's going on now. So what we're trying to do is actually raise funds for some of the nonprofits that are right on the ground in Ukraine and in the surrounding areas, in Hungary, in Czech Republic, in Poland, in the Baltic states. So we're working right now to organize what are the reputable anti-trafficking organizations in those countries and see how we could raise funds to get them resources directly. I know there's also organizations in different countries that are offering services. So I know, for example, in New York, the Sex Workers Project and a couple of other organizations are offering free legal services and help for people from Ukraine that are coming to the United States to settle. And I know that UNICEF and Save the Children and a number of other organizations are collecting funds. So maybe young people could get together if they belong to a church or a youth group, or, you know, maybe help raise some funds in their communities. Because I think that's really what these organizations that are at the front line need. With all of us being so far away, it's too dangerous for any of us to really go there or to do, you know, to really volunteer and help out ourselves. So I think the best way we could do is to try to get resources and donate to all these organizations who are on the front line trying to educate people as they come across their borders and as they resettle in their countries.
Awesome, thank you. We're going to take a couple of more questions. So our next question is, what is the first thing you say to a survivor? How do you help them get over the trauma that's such an unimaginable situation like being a victim of human trafficking?
Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. So whenever I'm meeting a survivor for the first time, the first thing I ask them is, you know, what do you need? Do you want some food? Do you want to sleep? I mean, it's often the basic needs that someone needs help with. Do you have an injury? Oftentimes, especially when it's with young people, they haven't eaten any quality food in months, or, you know, they're living off fast food or gas station food or a very poor diet, or the starvation is often used as a form of control. So sometimes getting someone a hot meal that's something that they really want, like their favorite food, really can help them. Making sure they're safe and in a safe place, because if someone's not in a safe place, you can't really help them. So safety planning is one of the most important things we do right off the bat when we meet a survivor of trafficking. And, you know, oftentimes a survivor of trafficking absolutely has no idea they're a victim of human trafficking. Human trafficking is a very complex crime that, you know, takes weeks of training for someone to really thoroughly understand all the dynamics and the elements of the legal definitions of human trafficking. So it's not really so much important for that person to understand what they're a crime of, but to really just understand what their basic needs are. You know, do they need medical care? Do they need food? Do they need a place to stay? Do they need medication? Do they need to call a family member? You know, really, the way I've always worked and that we train at the Freedom Network, at the Global Center on Human Trafficking and organizations I'm involved with, is, you know, really a harm reduction approach, meeting a survivor where they're at, what they need at their pace.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for such an insightful answer. We'll be moving on to our last question. I know there was so many questions in the chat. I believe you dropped your email, so if anyone whose answer didn't get answered, feel free to email Ms. Boak your question. So our final question will be, do you have any final words to all of our participants here, or any message that you hope that they take away from this?
Yeah, I would say that my message would be, never underestimate the difference that one person can make and that you can make yourself. And so many anti-trafficking and social justice and things that have really changed the world just started with one person's passion and one person saying, I'm going to figure out how to make a difference on this. And then other people join in. And if you're really doing something that you have passion, follow your passion, because if you're passionate about something, you're going to be successful. You're going to be successful in terms of your outcome. You're going to be successful in terms of being able to support yourself and earning an income doing that. If someone had told me when I was in grad school that I was going to be dedicating my whole career to this thing called human trafficking, I thought I was going to law school. But it was something that I was just very passionate about, and just would not take no for an answer, that we needed to do something. And along the way was able to start so many different organizations and initiatives that have, involved thousands of people. So my parting words were, follow your dreams, follow your heart, follow your passions, and just go for it.
Wow, that's thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming to our to give our opening today, and we are so excited for the rest of this Global Week of Action, and we really appreciate all of your amazing words to our participants. I know that all of the participants also really enjoyed your words as well, based on all the conversations and questions that were asked in the chat. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I do hope to hear from a lot of you. You all have my email, and you can go to Global Center on Human Trafficking. Just search us up. We'll pop right up on the web too, if you want to check us out more.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Good luck. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Awesome. So we're going to continue on with the rest of our opening. So Ayuko, would it be possible for you to share your screen again? Awesome. Could you do the next slide really quick? Actually. Okay, yeah, we can do this video. Okay. Yeah, we'll play this video first and we'll go back to the last one. Thank you.
A vision in my mind. It's time for me to go. The reasons all around. I miss you. I miss you. I wanna see through my own eyes. Real life, good life. I will stand by myself for you. can't dream anymore.
Thank you so much for playing that inspiring video, Aiko. I'm going to pass it over to Tanisha, who's going to talk a little bit more about the Bluehot campaign.
Next slide, please, Aiko. All right, so now the Unodc Bluehot campaign. This is by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and it aims to raise awareness of the plight of the victims and also to build political support to find the criminals behind trafficking. The blue heart in this case represents the sadness of those who are trafficked, while also reminding us of the cold-heartedness of those who buy and sell fellow human beings. And the use of the blue UN color also demonstrates the commitment of the United Nations towards human trafficking and protecting human dignity. So by wearing this, you will raise awareness of human trafficking, increase the visibility of victims, and also join the campaign globally. However, why is this so prominent? This specific campaign, this is because human trafficking, as we've seen through Ms Boak, is a very big global problem and one of the world's most shameful crimes, affecting the lives of millions of people around the world and robbing them of a basic dignity. This campaign supports trafficked victims, and all proceeds go to the United Nations Voluntary Trust Fund. So I'll just add the link in the chat for this campaign and a Grace Initiative campaign, which is also based on the Unodc and their work towards human trafficking. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are honored to have Ms Joana Wrabetz from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, who will be speaking about her work in combating human trafficking and the role the UN plays in fighting the practice. She has 20 years of professional experience, 14 dedicated to trafficking in persons. And she was also the former director of the Observatory on THV from the Ministry of Interior of Portugal, and a member of the European Commission Expert Group on Human Trafficking. Aiko, could you please play the video?
Dear participants of the Global Week of Action for the Sustainable Development Goal 16, it is a great pleasure and an honor to be able to address you. Some words to mark the
pause it really quick? I don't think the participants can see it on your screen. I'm not sure if you have to share all of your, we only hear her voice. I don't know if it's on a different window. Oh, perfect, thank you.
Dear participants of the Global Week of Action for the Sustainable Development Goal 16, it is a great pleasure and an honor to be able to address you. Some words to mark the beginning of this session on the SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is to say, to ensure that we live in societies where the rule of law is implemented fairly. The priority areas for this week include human trafficking and corruption. So in the few minutes that I have, I will not be able to get into much detail, but I hope that I can highlight just a couple of aspects. First, it is very important to understand what exactly is the crime of trafficking and how it differs from different crimes like the crime of migrant smuggling. Second, how corruption may be an enabler of trafficking in persons, hinder an early identification of its victims, and prevent access to health and legal support, and of course to the redress. And third and last, how the Sustainable Development Goals are targeting trafficking in persons, and how can you be involved? So what exactly is the crime of trafficking? Trafficking in persons means the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people by improper means such as the use of force, fraud, deception, abuse of power, or an abuse of a position of vulnerability with the aim of exploiting them. This means that the crime of trafficking has three main constitutive elements. So the action, what is done. Second is the means, how it is done. And finally, the objective, the purpose. Why? What for? So regarding the action, what was done, the definition provided in Article 3 clarifies. It is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people. The means, how it was done, it can be done through physical, sexual abuse, blackmail, the removal of official documents, emotional manipulation, and abuse of a position of vulnerability. These are just some of the means that the traffickers can use. And finally, why? What was the purpose? And the purpose is always exploitation. But this exploitation can take many forms. It can be exploitation in the sex, entertainment, and hospitality industries, domestic workers, or in forced marriages. Victims are also forced to work in factories, in construction sites, with horrible conditions, with no means, no payment. So everything that you can imagine actually can be used as a way to exploit victims. Some victims are also coerced into having their organs removed. Some children are forced to serve as soldiers or to commit crimes for the benefit of the criminals. And the exploitation can take place either in a victim's country, during migration, or in a foreign country. So, and who is a trafficker? A trafficker is anyone who recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, receives, or exploits a person. But it's also anyone who attempts to commit a human trafficking act and anyone who participates as an accomplice in a human trafficking act. So taking in consideration the present situation in Europe, it is very important to highlight that people living in a context of conflict or coming out of a conflict are particularly vulnerable to fall prey to human trafficking. Trafficking in persons in the context of armed conflict can also take many forms, as sexual exploitation of women and girls by members of armed and terrorist groups, the use of trafficked children as soldiers, removal of organs to treat wounded fighters, or finance war, enslavement as a tactic of terrorism, including its use to suppress ethnic minorities. But now, internally displaced persons, refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants may be approached in transit locations or in planned or spontaneous displacement settings. And we are seeing that a lot of people coming out from Ukraine are already, especially women with their children alone, are already receiving these kind of proposals, and we need to be aware of that. They can also be approached in official or in informal camps and other residential areas where displaced people are concentrated. Criminals with access to such sites may offer bogus employment or education opportunities, or pose as relatives and caretakers. And this is very important to keep in mind, especially taking in consideration the quantity of children and unaccompanied minors that are also traveling at this time. So migrants in countries affected by crisis may also face increased risks of exposure to trafficking due to their limited access to humanitarian assistance, national protection mechanisms, social networks, and other support systems. A crisis may create a demand for exploitative services, such as demand created by aid workers and peacekeepers who sometimes may seek for sexual services. Reports have highlighted the targeting of women and girls for sexual exploitation and slavery during conflicts, and non-state armed groups have reportedly abducted women and girls for the purpose of trafficking for sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and child early and forced marriage. Smuggling of migrants, on the other hand, involves the procurement for the financial or other material benefit of illegal entry of a person into a state of which that person is not a national or a resident. It also contains three elements, but these three elements are different. So the first element is the crossing of an international border. The second element is that such crossing is made without having the proper means, without having the proper legal documents, the visa. So it's done in an illegal manner. And the person is not a resident or a national of that country. So it always implies this crossing our borders in an illegal way. And then also a very, very important element of it is the procurement for financial or other material benefits. So who is guilty here, who is punished under the law, is not the person that crossed the border illegally, it's not the migrant, but those that benefit from this crossing, those that make money by helping others crossing the border in an illegal way. The main differences between these two crimes are, first, consent. The smuggling of migrants, while often undertaken in dangerous and degrading conditions, involves migrants who have consented to the smuggling. Trafficking victims, on the other hand, have either never consented, or if they consented initially, that consent is now irrelevant because they were used coercive measures, or they were deceived, or they were abused by the traffickers. The second element is exploitation. Smuggling ends with the arrival of the migrants at their destination, whereas trafficking involves the ongoing exploitation of the victims in some manner to generate illicit profits for the traffickers. So there is an ongoing exploitation. And the transnationality element. Smuggling is always transnational, whereas trafficking can be national or transnational. The distinctions between smuggling and trafficking are often very, very subtle, and sometimes they overlap too. So the scenario may be so similar that an investigator or a prosecutor may be tempted to treat them as, for instance, a case of smuggling instead of a case of trafficking. And also the punishment differs. That's why it's very important to identify, because although smuggling can be very hard on victims, the victims of trafficking suffer a lot of traumas and they need to be properly addressed. What happens is that sometimes it starts as a case of smuggling. Somebody used the services of a smuggler to go to another country, and then during the process it transformed into a case of trafficking. So virtually every country in the world is affected by these crimes. The challenge for all countries richer and poor is to target the criminals who exploit vulnerable people, including through an effective international cooperation, and to protect and assist, of course, the victims of trafficking and smuggled migrants, many of whom endure unimaginable hardships, and most of them just want to look for a better life in a different country. Now, the second aspect, corruption. How corruption may be an enabler of trafficking in persons. Corruption has a wide range of corrosive effects on societies. It undermines democracy and the rule of law. It also leads to violations of human rights, distorts markets, erodes the quality of life, and allows organized crime, terrorism, and other threats to human security to flourish. Several United Nations bodies have emphasized the adverse effects of corruption on human rights. Corruption hampers the human rights of all individuals in a society, but members of vulnerable groups and groups exposed to marginalization and discrimination may suffer first and may suffer disproportionately from corruption. Groups of individuals who may collectively experience the negative impacts of corruption will include women, children, the elderly, indigenous people, irregular migrants and other non-nationals, people with disabilities, prisoners, sexual minorities, and people living in poverty. Why? Because these groups are more often more reliant on public goods and services, such as the education and the healthcare, and they have limited means to look for alternative private services. They also have fewer opportunities to participate in the design and implementation of public policies and programs. They lack also the resources that they would need to defend themselves against all these violations, to demand for their rights and to seek reparations. So if corruption, in one hand, can have the effect of intensifying the already existing difficulties experienced by members of such groups, on which we can include the victims or potential victims of trafficking in human beings, the trafficking in persons, in accessing public goods and services, but also as well as an access to justice. On the other hand, it may also involve the active participation of those that were supposed to deliver justice, take care of the victims of this already horrible crime. And I'm talking about the involvement, direct or indirect involvement of diplomatic and consular agents, police and criminal investigators, border guards, coast guards, managers of migrant detention centers, doctors, nurses, and other health personnel, prosecutors, and judges. All those that, while supposed to represent the state and defend the victims, further contribute to their abuse to benefit from the exploitation of those already vulnerable. So corruption will affect several rights of victims of trafficking, including access to fair trial and to an effective remedy. Here is where also the new UNODC initiative, GRACE, has also an important role to play. GRACE stands for Global Resource on Anti-Corruption Education and Youth Empowerment. Our mission is to create a culture of rejection of corruption among children and youth by harnessing the transformational power of education and partnerships, which are a very, very important element. And there are mainly three pillars: the primary and secondary education, academia and research, and youth empowerment. Through the several materials and initiatives, we want to strengthen the capacity of primary, secondary, and tertiary education institutions to teach anti-corruption, integrity, and ethics, to work with national education and anti-corruption authorities to raise awareness on the importance of value-based and anti-corruption education, to enhance the role of informal education sector, also to promote value-based and anti-corruption education, and to promote the role of as agents of change and their capacity to respond to corruption through innovation, technology, and social entrepreneurship, and support young professionals and researchers who work in the fields of anti-corruption, ethics, and integrity by enhancing their capacity, knowledge, and skills to prevent and fight corruption. The third element and final one, how the Sustainable Development Goals are targeting trafficking in persons. Through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, adopted by the international community, has committed itself to the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies for, of course, the sustainable development, to the provision of access to justice for all, and to the building of effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And this is exactly the SDG 16. In doing that, we are collectively combating all forms of organized crime, the SDG 16.4, including trafficking in persons. We have further to do this, specifically promised to take immediate and effective measures to eradicate trafficking in persons, the 8.7, and anti-abuse, exploitation, trafficking at all forms of violence against and torture of children, and this is target 16.2. To eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls in the public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation, the target 5.2. To facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration, the targets 10.7, the 5.2, 8.7, 10.7. There are many targets, but these specifically address the crimes of trafficking in persons and migrant smuggling, within also the context of violence against women, safe and orderly migration. So, to finalize, I hope that during this MUN conference, you all can learn about different approaches and policies by member states on the fight against trafficking and corruption, how the different countries relate to organized crime, migration, refuge, and the challenges of protecting victims and protecting the vulnerable, the most vulnerable victims, and to learn about all these categories of vulnerability and vulnerable victims in the context also of this large movement of migrants and refugees, including victims of trafficking and their very specific protection needs. And finally, and more important, to get more involved in the different types of responses to counter these crimes. I thank you once again for the invitation. It was really a pleasure and an honor to be able to address you, and I wish you all the very best and an excellent work ahead. Thank you.
Although Ms. Joana Wrabetz was unable to join us here on Zoom today, we are very grateful for her amazing presentation and video about the work that she does and her message to all of you. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the story maps that our amazing MUN Impact Story Maps team have created. They have a lot of insightful information that you all should check out. So I'll drop the link in the chat so you can access the, these story maps. There's 3 links, so feel free to check them out. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to give you a bit of information on the art contests that we will be running all of this month. Yesterday was the launch of this contest, and it includes all art forms of the UDHR, so the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is comprised of various articles. And what this contest entails is that students put together a piece of artwork specific towards an article of the UDHR. It can be any form of art, whether that be a painting, a dance and choreography, a photography, poetry, a short story, pottery, any form of art that you can think of that you would like to express in a certain article from the UDHR, you are welcome to use. We have this art contest running until April 31st, so please make sure that you are submitting all of your art forms, whether that be like a picture or however you can submit that through our type form. Winners will receive an SDG 16 prize pack. We're running this in conjunction with Youth Initiatives Durham, which was one of our partners based in Canada. You can check them out on Instagram too. They have a lot of different community service campaigns going on, and they're a very awesome organization that focuses on the SDGs just like MUN Impact does. I'll put the link in the chat really quick so you all can access that. The contest submission form, just give me one moment. I just dropped the link. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me at kverando@munimpact.org. I just dropped my email in the chat as well. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. Yes. Okay, it doesn't seem like the next slide is loading, but I just wanted to thank everyone for coming to this opening ceremonies. Thank you all for listening in on Ms. Boak's and Ms. Joanna's presentations and hearing what they have to say regarding human trafficking and SDG 16 in general. We have our Sandbox sessions right now, so I will put the link in the chat for you all to join. So thank you so much everyone for your time. Please join our Sandbox session, and thank you all for coming. You're all free to leave now.